The results are out. 51 of our students have made it to the toppers list in 2020 UPSC examination. If you also dream to crack this examination, I would encourage you to join our YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and stay up to date in your preparation. तैयारी आपकी, जिम्मेदारी हमारी.
This is a video on the unpacking of the General Studies paper number 2 syllabus. We have already done a video in which we have given a brief outline of how to prepare for polity and governance, which is a part of the General Studies 2 paper. What we will do in this is a bit of a detailed analysis of some elements of the General Studies paper number 2 as it is given in the UPSC syllabus. In the other video, which if you haven't seen it, you can see it, we've discussed the ways in which one has to orient oneself while preparing for the subject of polity and governance, and within that we had discussed some elements of the syllabus. What we do today is we just break down some of those elements in analytical terms and try to understand how questions are framed from the particular lines in the syllabus and what do these particular lines in the syllabus mean and signify. Basically, the attempt or the agenda of this video is to prepare yourself to understand the nature and the scope of what you have to read while you're preparing for the General Studies paper 2. Okay, so let's get started. If you look at the General Studies paper number 2, you have the following elements, the 5 elements which are mentioned in the headline itself. It says governance, constitution, polity, social justice, and international relations. Okay, all of these are elements which are present in 20 points which are given underneath it as points in syllabus, and then there is some kind of a elaboration or description. It would be helpful if while you're watching this video, you can also have a copy of the UPSC notification, a PDF handy for a ready reference. So the kind of correspondence that we want to build would be easier in building up with that. Okay. Otherwise, even if you watch this video, it would be sufficient for you to get an understanding very simply. Okay. So the first part is governance, then there is constitution, and then there is polity. Usually all of this in very simple language is understanding as polity. Okay, so when we think about governance, constitution, and polity, we generally refer to it in a kind of a commonsensical way, not in a technical way, the subject of polity. And then there is social justice. Now, social justice is something which deals with, for instance, poverty and hunger, healthcare, education, etc. All of this, which is social justice. As you may remember that social justice is one of the promises of the preamble. Okay, it is different from society. Society is a subject in GS paper number 1. That is a different subject. Society is different and social justice is different. It has different coverages, different subjects, and different approaches. And then there is a element of international relations, which is basically it covers multilateral institutions, geopolitical affairs, and all kinds of diplomatic and other relationship between the countries. It has some element of international politics also. So that is all covered under international relations. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples from the syllabus and try to break down them in analytical terms to develop a kind of a deeper understanding about what it is. Okay, the first part of the GS2 syllabus reads as Indian Constitution. This is exactly how it reads, Indian Constitution, and then it is broken down into these 5 elements. Number 1, historical underpinnings. Number 2, evolution. Okay, how do we understand these two, historical underpinnings and evolution? Now, as you know that the Indian Constitution was not a radical revolutionary thing that just came out from nowhere in 1947. There was a huge political organizational process that went stages after stages, and the end culmination or the end result of that was the Constitution of India as we know now. Okay, so basically there were a lot of historical aspects involved in achieving that stage, and there was a lot of legal or statutory antecedents which preceded the falling or the formation of the Constitution of India. Okay, so for instance, you can take a look at something like the Government of India Act 1935. Okay, there are many questions asked related to the Government of India Act 1935, and a lot of what is currently present in the Constitution of India. For example, the three lists in the Constitution of India. The state list, the union list, and the concurrent list was already mentioned as a feature in the Government of India Act 1935, right? So when we study something like historical underpinnings or evolution, we are looking at the socio-cultural, political aspects of the time which enabled the constitution to come in force, and also the legal aspects. For instance, the statutes which were statutes what we mean by statutes is the laws which were enforced before the Constitution of India came into its full maturation. Okay, so that's basically what is going to be the coverage over here: historical underpinnings and the evolution. After that, you have the features of the Constitution. What are the features of the Constitution? For instance, it is a written constitution. For instance, it is the lengthiest constitution of the world. For instance, it is a constitution which has been inspired by many number of constitutions in the world. For instance, the French Constitution, the American Constitution, the English Constitution. Okay, so that are basically the features: the written constitution, lengthiest constitutions, all that. Okay, so this is what is covered in the third point, features. After that, there is amendments. Okay, now amendments is basically nothing but the still ongoing evolution of the Constitution of India. Okay, for instance, one of the examples of the questions that can be asked from the amendment is that right to property was moved from being a fundamental right to being a legal right. This is a question which is very frequently asked in the UPSC, and this is an example of the questions that can be asked from amendments. And then there is the last and very important topic. If there is one very important topic in the entire GS2 syllabus in terms of its coverage in the examination, it is significant provisions and basic structure. Okay, significant provisions for include something like the preamble. Then there is the fundamental rights. Then there are fundamental duties, and then there are DPSP, the Directive Principles of State Policy. Generally speaking, from Article 1 to Article 51 of the Constitution of India can be classified as the significant provision. More importantly, the fundamental rights and the preamble. Okay, so this is what basically we mean by a significant provision, what is very important within the Constitution itself. And of course, there is a doctrine of the basic structure, which is basically that the significant provisions of the Constitution cannot be altered or changed, right? Now, a variety of questions have been asked from this particular element itself. Okay, the basic structure doctrine was laid down in one of the most, in fact, the most landmark judgment of the Supreme Court, the case Anand Bharati judgment, and it has a huge range of questions which are asked in any kind of examination from this particular element. Okay, let's take a look at some of these questions. This is a question which is from the historical underpinnings part. Did the Government of India Act lay down a federal constitution? Discuss. Okay, so this is what basically we say, that the seats of the federal constitution were already sown in the Government of India Act 1935. Okay, let's take a look at this one. This is from the significant provision. Discuss each adjective attached to the word republic in the preamble. Are they defendable in the present circumstances? Okay, so this is basically a kind of a elaboration upon the preamble. And then examine the scope of fundamental rights in the light of the latest judgment on the Supreme Court on the right to privacy. This is a 2017 question in which a current affairs element has been synthesized with a significant provision, which is basically the fundamental rights, right? So if you have to take a look at examples of how questions are framed from the syllabus, you can take a look at these examples which are given over here, right? Historical underpinnings, you have a question on the Government of India Act. From the significant provisions and basic structure, you have two questions, one on the preamble and one on the fundamental rights. Okay, what I'm trying to do over here is I'm trying to decode for you the process through which the examiner actually takes a look at the syllabus and drafts the question. Okay, it is a kind of an obligation for the examiner to not move beyond the scope of the syllabus even 1 inch. Whatever creativity, whatever difficulty, whatever variety the examination has to produce, it has to produce within the scope provided by the syllabus only. And this kind of an exercise gives you an understanding how, looking at the syllabus, these kind of questions have been drafted. Okay, let's move to the second point, which is the division of powers, right? This is the second point in the syllabus. Out of the 20 points, it is a second point. It is not written as division of powers, but it is a title that we can use because it talks about the functions and responsibilities of the union and the states. Okay, so basically it talks about the center state relationships and all the issues pertaining to that, the center and the state relationship. For instance, the division of powers between the center and the state in the 7th schedule of the constitution, which gives the subjects upon which the center or the union or the state can make the law, right? So that kind of a thing is all covered under this particular area. Issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure is a very, very increasingly important topic. In the year 2020 itself, there were 2 questions from this very topic itself. The question of federalism, which is again the idea of whether there is more power with the union or whether there is more power with the states. And then the last part in this element is a devolution of powers and finances up to the local levels and challenges there. So it talks about the grants which are given by the Union of India to the states of India. You would remember the discourse about the Bimaru states, etc., that there were states after states asking the government of India to be declared as states which are in need of dire funds, with the grants which are to be given by the Union of India. All of these kind of questions and discourses are going to be covered under devolution of powers and finances. Okay, how does the union government or the government of India give money to states which are not able to catch up with the development process, and how does it regulate that kind of money, those finances, are used properly by those states? Okay, so the whole administrative and the constitutional machinery behind this is studied under this topic. Let's take a look at some questions. If you take a look at the first question, it says, how far do you think cooperation, competition, and confrontation have shaped the nature of federation in India? Cite some recent examples to validate your answers. This is 2020 itself, okay? Nature of federation in India. Then Indian constitution exhibits centralizing tendencies to maintain unity and integrity of the nation, elucidate in the perspective of the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897, the Disaster Management Act 2005, and recently passed Farm Acts, right? As you can see that this is a question which is directly from this part of the syllabus, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. Now, what the examiner has done is he has taken this part of the syllabus and converted it into a question with a reference to the current affairs events. Epidemic Diseases Act became relevant only in the coronavirus crisis. The Disaster Management Act was also invoked to deal with the pandemic, and of course the Farm Acts, right? So, again, this is the basic point of this video. How does the examiner look at the subject, and how does he make questions from the syllabus which are also in a way balanced by introducing something from the current affairs? Okay, so this is basically one example of how this is done. Moving on, the third part of the 20 part is the separation of powers. Okay, the separation of powers between various organs of the state. The various organs of the states are the legislative, executive, and judiciary, and there is in the constitution itself some envisioning as to what are the particular and specific domains in which they can operate, and if they can even encroach in the domain of the other, under what possibilities can they do it, can they not do it? For instance, does India have a strict separation of power, or India has a checks and balance mechanism, is a question that was asked. Okay, so all of these conceptual and foundational philosophical aspects of the separation of powers are asked under this point, right? Number one. Then dispute redressal mechanisms and institutions. Okay, this is basically pertaining to the idea of the independence of judiciary and the way in which disputes in India are settled by one organ of the states, which are governed by a kind of a judicial framework. So let's take a look at some question. Okay, this is a question on the separation of powers. Do you think that the Constitution of India does not accept principle of strict separation of powers? Rather, it is based on the principles of checks and balances, right? This is just a question that I gave you an idea about, and this is a question which appeared in 2019, directly prepared from this part of the syllabus, separation of powers between various organs. If you are referring to the PDF of the UPSC notification, you can look at it. We have taken exactly the terms which are used in the syllabus. We haven't changed anything significantly, and this is how a question from it has been drafted. All right. Then you have the fourth part in the constitution part, which is comparative constitutionalism. Basically, predicated upon the fact that the Indian Constitution did actually borrow a lot of conceptual knowledge and ideas and frameworks from foreign constitution, the English Constitution, the American Constitution, etc. And how does Indian Constitution, is in similarity with some of these constitutions and in difference with some of these constitutions is basically the ideas that we study under comparative constitutionalism. Let's take a look at this 2019 question. What can France learn from Indian Constitution's approach to federalism? Okay, this is basically a comparison of the value of secularism in different constitutional schemes, the French Constitution and the Indian Constitution, right? So this is where, now if I have to take a bit of a revision of what we are doing over here, first thing that we have studied, the first element that we have studied is the element of constitution in the syllabus, and it has 4 aspects to it. The first is simply known as Indian Constitution, which contains the aspect of historical underpinnings, evolution of the Indian Constitution, the amendments given to it, the significant provisions. Okay, that is the Indian Constitution part, which is a most relevant part. Then there is the part of division of powers, which is basically dealing with the entire thing related to the center and the state relationships, right? The union and the state relationships, and it includes the aspect of federalism. Okay, then the third point is the idea or the concept of separation of powers. How do the 3 organs of the state, the legislature, the judiciary and the executive, interact with each other? And the fourth is the comparison of constitution, which is basically how does Indian Constitution agree with or disagree with the other constitutions of the world. Okay, so this is basically, I'm just giving you a sample of how the syllabus has been divided in its first 4 elements, which covers the part of the constitution. Okay, so if we look at the the 5 elements that we discussed in the beginning, constitution has these 4 parts that we cover. Now from the constitution part we move to the polity part, but since the paucity of time, we are only going to touch upon certain important areas from the polity part. And if you want a detailed analysis, you can leave a request or a comment in the section, and then we can try to think of a video in which we can make a detailed analysis of it, right? So this is the part of the polity part, the parliament and state legislatures, right? Now we arrive not at the values or the ideas of the Constitution of India. Once we have covered them, we arrive at the structures, the institutions, the organizations, the bodies which are supposed to carry these ideas forward, okay? This is strictly speaking what we understand by polity as different from Constitution, okay? So when we talk about the public institutions which are working in India in terms of the parliament and the state legislature, the executive and judiciary, how members are appointed to them, what are their functions, how do they conduct their businesses, what are their powers, etc., we refer to this specifically as the study of polity. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. The first part that we study in polity is structure, then there is functioning, and the code of business, and the powers and privileges and issues arising out of this, right? This is under the title Parliament and State Legislature, basically the law-making bodies of a structure or of an organization, and how do they interact with each other, okay? So you have the structure, the function, the conduct of business, and the power and privileges arising out of the powers which are given to the legislature. Let's take a look at a sample question. This is a 2020 question. Rajya Sabha has been transformed from a useless stepney tire to the most useful supporting organ in past few decades. Highlight the factors as well as areas in which this transformation could be visible, right? This is a question which is directly arriving from this part of the syllabus. The part of the syllabus over here is parliament and state legislature, the functioning part. Okay, what are the functions of Rajya Sabha? Previously it was thought that the Rajya Sabha did not have any great function to contribute. It was a useless stepney tire, but now the idea has transformed into thinking about it as the most useful supporting organ of the Indian legislature. Okay, so this is the first part of polity. Now, then you have, the whole part about the executive and the judiciary, which are the 2 other elements of the separation of powers. The 2 other elements of the separation of power, the executive and the judiciary, they take up, the questions which are going to be asked in the exam are enlisted in a syllabus: structure, organization, and functioning of the executive and the judiciary, ministries and departments of the government. Here you will find the questions are about what ministry controls what, finance ministry's mandate is what, agriculture ministry's mandate is what, etc., and the departments of the government. Okay, and then the pressure groups and formal informal associations and their role in polity. This is a question or syllabus part which is becoming increasingly important because of the farm protests, which are basically a pressure group related protest. Okay, so this has been a part of the question in the 2020 or 2019 paper also. Then we take a look at a very simple topic, which is the Representation of People's Act, which is basically the idea of what are the salient features of Representation of People Acts, what are the conditions under which people can stand for elections, what are the conditions of the disqualification, some powers of the Election Commission of India. It deals with the democratic process of conducting elections in a country like India, which is itself a very, very huge achievement, and therefore we need to understand some part of the act which governs the conduct of election. Then after that we have the constitutional posts and constitutional bodies. Okay, constitutional posts and constitutional bodies, for example, are the Finance Commission, the Comptroller Auditor General of India, the Attorney General of India, the GST Council. All of these bodies which are having their genesis, having their birth within the Constitution of India, are known as the constitutional bodies, and we have to understand how members are appointed to these bodies, what powers they have, what functions they dispense, and what are their responsibilities, right? So these are examples of what the constitutional bodies are. Then after that you have the extra constitutional bodies, or basically the other institutions of India, the public institutions of India, which are, let's say, the statutory bodies which are made under acts, regulatory bodies which are made by the executive decisions. For instance, the Planning Commission is not a statutory body, was not a statutory body, it's a regulatory body. And then there are quasi-judicial bodies, which are basically bodies which are having some amount of adjudicating powers associated with them, right? So this is a part in which we study the public institutions of India. After that, we have the subject of government policies. What are government policies? For instance, the question around the National Education Policy 2020, a question which was asked in 2020 mains itself, comes from this: what are the various policies made by the government to ensure that some sectors of the government are producing well results and doing their task properly. Okay, so policies and interventions for development in various sectors. Number one, issues arising out of their design and implementation. Okay, so for instance, a question could be, what are the issues which are still available to the National Education Policy 2020? A possible question like this can be asked. After that, you have the development processes and development industry, which includes the non-governmental organization, the self-help groups, the groups and associations, donors and charities, and institutional stakeholders, right? This is basically the part. What we basically learn in this part is how does the society itself fulfills what you call the government deficit. Okay, something which has to be done by the government, but due to some institutional reasons the government cannot take up the task of doing that. Then because of that reason, some other units within the society have to rise to the occasion, and all of that is known as development processes. For instance, the non-governmental organizations, the self-help groups, all of this covers under the title which is given over here. After that, you have the concept of the welfare state. It's a very important concept increasingly. For instance, if you have a question on the NREGA or a centrally sponsored scheme, all of these questions are questions which are given under the welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections of population by the center and the states, and the performance of these schemes and mechanisms, laws, institutions, and bodies constituted for the protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections, right? So this is basically the idea of the welfare state, which makes sure that no person who's vulnerable lives without food, shelter, clothing, and the basic amenities of sustaining a life. All right, so this is the part we will discuss the welfare state. Now, increasingly, now we are moving from the idea of governance, of polity, to the idea of social justice. Okay, this is the third element we have understood. social justice. So, for instance, development and management of social sector services related to health, education, human resources is a part of social justice. Similarly, issues relating to poverty and hunger are also a part of social justice. You can take a look at this question. This is a 2019 question. The incidence and intensity of poverty are more important in determining poverty based on income alone. Okay. In this context, analyze the latest United Nations multi-dimensional poverty index report. Okay. So this is a kind of an example of a question from the topic of social justice. Okay. And after that, we arrive at the aspects of governance. Okay, so this is the most governance heavy part of the syllabus, which includes the concepts of transparency and accountability. E-governance specifically has become a very relevant topic in the recent years, and the citizens charter. As you can see, e-governance is one of the most hot topics in the years of the pandemic, because a lot of information communication technology was used by the government to dispense some services which it could not do otherwise. Here's a question that you can take a look at. Take a look at this question. The emergence of the fourth industrial revolution, digital revolution, has initiated e-governance as an integral part of the government. Okay, so this is a question on 2020 itself. Take a look at a question on citizens charter. The Citizens Charter is an ideal instrument of organizational transparency and accountability, but it has its own limitations. Identify the limitations and suggest the measures for greater effectiveness of the Citizens Charter. All of this is core under the element of governance. Okay? The aspects of governance as it is called. After that, the another element in governance itself is the role of civil society in a democracy. It is a very simple and not very frequently asked part of the examination, but there is some literature that one must cover into it. After that, we come to the last part of our syllabus of the GS2 paper, which is international relations. And the first part within international relations is the title of India and its neighborhood relations. Okay, so this is basically the policy or the foreign policy that India has towards its neighbors, for instance, Pakistan, China, and Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc. What are the policies now? You will see that more frequently questions from the neighboring state in terms of India's relationship with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Myanmar, etc. These questions are more frequent than India's relationship with US or France or Germany or Italy. Okay, so this is an important part in the international relations. After that, you have the bilateral and regional global groupings, which includes the agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. You would remember there is something in the news for quite some time which is known as the RCEP. These are the kind of questions which are asked from this particular domain. Then you have, let's take a look at a question from the international groupings. Increasing cross-border terrorist attacks in India and growing interference in the internal affairs of several member states by Pakistan are not conducive for the future of SAARC. Okay, SAARC is a South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, and it is a item which falls under this particular part, which is bilateral, regional, and global groupings. Okay, then after that you have the geopolitical aspects of the syllabus of international relations. For instance, effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests, and then the idea of Indian diaspora. Okay, this is all covered in the part of geopolitics, which falls under international relations. And then there is the part of international institutions. Okay, important international institutions, agencies, and fora, their structure and mandate. Let's take a sample look at the question of this last category. In this, we have the international organization of international institution of UNESCO, upon which the question has been asked. Recently, the question has been asked on WHO, which is an international organization, international institution of some relevance during the COVID-19 pandemic. You can pause the video and take a look at these questions. Okay. So here we have covered in a very crisp amount of time, in a kind of a very, a paced manner, all the elements which are provided in the syllabus of the GS paper 2. Okay, let's just quickly take a look at the 5 elements, and we have already covered some of these elements in detail. If you want the other elements, or if you want that there must be a kind of a detailed analysis of each of those topics in the syllabus, you can leave that suggestion in the comments. We've covered governance, we've covered constitution, we've covered polity, social justice, and international relations. Okay, so this is the end of the video. Thank you for your time. And